Hi, guys. Welcome to Talking Bar. Today, I am so excited. I have a fellow therapist with me, and we're going to talk about our favorite topic, which might sound a little strange that this is our favorite topic. Right, Annie? Her name is Annie Wright, and she is a therapist out of Berkeley, California, and we are both obsessed with complex PTSD or relational trauma or attachment trauma. We'll get to that, Annie, how it's all under the same umbrella. And so I don't know how I found Annie, right? But I did find her. And so weekly, she has the most amazing newsletters. And so on the show notes, we'll put, where to subscribe to them. And so I get her weekly amazing newsletters. And then one week, I get a newsletter called Why I Dislike the Wolf of Wall Street. So we were meant to be connected.
That's so.
Right, Annie?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, what a small world.
Yeah. Yes. So why don't you just lead in with that? So that article I absolutely, of course, adored because it validated my experience.
Well, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled that was the case. And again, it's whatever the magic and the mystery of the internet is, we somehow crossed paths. I had no idea you were, out there, and certainly no idea that you were a fellow therapist. But the entire reason why I wrote that article is because I am an expert in relational trauma, in complex PTSD, developmental trauma, all the same terms for really the same experience. And
can you define that? How do you define that?
Yeah, so complex relational trauma is what I believe is a series of traumas that take place over time in a relationship where there's an imbalance of power, usually between a child and a caregiver. Yes. Certainly, though, it can take place between, a child and a coach, or a child and the leader of an orphanage. But sure. Really, it's an experience that takes
a child and a priest, a child and a Boy Scout leader, right?
Correct.
Right.
Or I even think of it beyond an individual. It can also take place in the context of an institution too. So a child or adolescent in a church or a cult. However the content plays out, it's really a series of developmental traumas that take place over time in the context of a relationship where there's an imbalance of power, usually during formative years, but certainly relational trauma can happen when somebody's past the teenage and child years, well into the 20s, 30s, and onwards. So that's how I personally define it.
And I agree.
Yeah, I think it has a lot of different clinical terms.
Yeah.
PTSD, developmental trauma. I call it complex relational trauma, but of course, all of those terms apply.
Yes. And I call it complex PTSD and attachment trauma.
Yes.
But it doesn't matter what we call it, really, is that it's very detrimental to the child.
Completely. And back to the reason why I wrote that article. First of all, I do love movies. I love film. I love really good TV shows. And I remember having watched that, some years ago. Mm-hmm. But when I was thinking about articles that I want to write that could potentially validate the experience of readers who might have seen that movie. Certainly didn't know I'd be, connecting with somebody who lived out that movie. My hope in writing that article was to take this illustration of the character within the movie, Jordan Belfort, and really illustrate that this is an example of how complex relational trauma can develop when you have an individual who is either personality, mood disordered, addicted, and what the sort of ensuing effects or impacts can be on the ones around them. Yes. I wrote that article, and the reason why I titled it, Why I Dislike the Wolf of Wall Street, it's not because I have anything against him personally. Rather, the piece that I dislike is how Hollywood very often glamorizes individuals like that. And I think that's to the real detriment of the people who can be the collateral damage in the lives of those individuals. So that's why I wrote the article, and that's how we connected.
And that's how, because I read the article and I just resonated so much with all of your points in the article, and especially about the glamorization
Mm.
of such abuse.
Mhm.
Because yes, there were very funny moments in the movie and in life. However, the experience of lived trauma, of course, as you know, you mentioned for my daughter, who's also a therapist
Yeah.
now, was intense because she was under 5. And of course, I was older, so it was a different experience for me.
Yeah.
But I really did enjoy how you honestly, and
Mm.
also with an educational balance, critiqued the movie.
I appreciate that more than you can know. I mean,
And so I reached out to you and said, "This is awesome."
and I was completely well, gobsmacked, really. It was such an honor to hear from you, but also it was an honor not only, to connect with you, but to have somebody say, yes, I think you handled this appropriately. And I think you actually hit the nail on the head, which is what I'm always trying to do in the course of my writing. I'm not trying to demonize the individuals who maybe are the ones who create the trauma. I do want to create a certain level of compassion for the context that might occur. But at the same time, I really want to create validation for, I don't like the word victims, but I like the word for the children and family members of those who were exposed to that individual. So that's always my goal, is to create validation.
Well, you did that very well. So you
Thank
succeeded.
you.
Check.
Thank you.
So Annie, so can you let me know and the viewers know, how did you get interested in complex PTSD? What led you there?
Well, like so many therapists, my specialty grew out of personal story.
Mhm.
I come from a background of pretty significant relational trauma, where I had a personality disordered parent who was also an addict as well as a criminal. And my
Oh,
other
no wonder that movie hit you. Okay, carry on.
there were a lot of parallels, a lot of parallels. We can go into that in more depth at some
Yeah.
point. Lots of parallels. And I had certainly another parent who did the best they could. She could. My mom was, the stable entity. But still, it wasn't enough, right? And so my own early childhood was colored by certainly emotional abuse, mental abuse, neglect, abandonment, and then ultimately disownment. At age 12, he took me to the courts and disowned me. And so I coped as best I could, throwing myself into academics. I became the first in my family to go to college, including the Ivy League.
Yeah.
But eventually my trauma history caught up with me. I was running from it as fast as I could, pretending everything was normal. It all caught up. It all caught up in the early 20s.
Wow, I just want to take a deep breath because a lot there.
It's a lot.
And I mean, a criminal, addicted,
Mm-hmm.
mom trying to do the best that she could.
Mm-hmm.
And as we say in therapy, oftentimes it's not good enough,
Mm,
right? We don't expect
right.
parents to be perfect. Sometimes they're just not good enough.
Yeah.
And then to be disowned at 12
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in a court situation, I
Mm-hmm.
can't even imagine how that felt as a 12-year-old. So
Mm,
you were, sounds like, overcompensating with education and
right.
plowing through
Yeah.
and right, I know, because perfectionism is a
Right.
great
Yes.
shame created by relational trauma. And so then when did it catch up with you and how?
Well, yeah, it's a really interesting confluence of events. So after Brown, I served in the Peace Corps in Uzbekistan, and I got placed in a very remote placement site for a volunteer. Normally, they place two Peace Corps volunteers together in a village at a time for companionship and, frankly, support. I didn't get placed with another one. And I also got placed in a part of the country where there weren't a lot of Peace Corps volunteers previously.
So you
And I
were
had,
alone?
mhm.
Oh, wow.
And I
What
had
happened?
a really unkind host family member. And that experience of being isolated, of being trapped, of feeling like I was locked into something for a couple of years, and then having a really unkind host family experience definitely started to trigger quite a bit inside of me. Then the Antisocial massacres of 2005 happened in Uzbekistan, and actually we, the Peace Corps volunteers, were yanked out of the country very abruptly. And then coupled with that, I had no kind of safe space to stay in and land when I went back to the United States. So all of these things happened: abandonment, feeling unsafe, feeling unsettled, feeling insecure, feeling completely lost. And that led to, what I now have a lot of gratitude for was the surfacing of all this trauma at once. And of course, I was in a major depressive episode for a couple of years there in my early 20s.
So for a couple of years. Okay.
I would say it was about 2 years, 23 to 25, right? Where I didn't understand what was going on. All the symptoms were there and in front of me.
Did you go to therapy?
I did. I took a job just so I could get benefits and go into therapy. Wow. That's really what I did.
And can I ask you, what made you join the Peace Corps?
I've always had a sense of strong service. Right. Even in high school, my valedictorian speech was about social justice and social service.
Your valedictorian speech?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So much fun getting to know you. Okay.
So I've always felt really strongly about giving back and serving others. And I thought that the Peace Corps was going to be an excellent venue for that. And in a lot of ways it was. I don't mean to disparage the program whatsoever. It's just the confluence of factors there triggered my own PTSD finally.
Yeah. And then even being pulled out reminds me of the 12-year-old self being thrown away in court, abruptly.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. And then, not being able to stay at my mother's home to recuperate and kind of fall apart, I had to go elsewhere. And so, it was terribly painful. And I had a lot of anger about those experiences for a long time. But I now see just, kind of the perfection of them, because they led me to therapy, certainly. But then very importantly, when I was 25, I was working in I was a corporate consultant working in the healthcare space. And somebody pointed me, I basically befriended the one other hippie in the entire corporation. And she one day pointed me to the website of a place called Esalen in Big Sur.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. Magical place. And when I
let people know what Esalen is for those who don't.
Sure. So Esalen is, it's billed as the home of the personal growth center of California. Founded in the early 1960s, it's now a workshop and retreat center running incredible workshops 365 days of the year. And I remember when I clicked on that website, this was back in 2007, so different branding back then. When I clicked on it, something inside me felt like, oh, I need to go there. So I did what you do when you're 25 without a mortgage and a child. I quit my job, I sold all my possessions, and I moved out to stay for a 1-month work scholar program there to work and study. 1 month turned into 2, turned into 4 years.
First of all, that's really amazing that you listen to that little voice.
Thank you.
What I call that voice, that voice, we don't know, I think it's our essence, our divinity, whatever we want to call it, our authentic self.
Yes.
How were you able to listen to that voice at such a young age?
Quite honestly, I think it was desperation more than anything else.
Okay, fair enough.
I was so desperately unhappy in Washington, D.C. Again, all this unresolved trauma, having no clue what it was about, having no dating life, no real strong friendships, no emotional integration, no sense of what I was doing with my life. I was so eager to find a life more worth living that I was just able to take that chance. It didn't really feel like a choice for me to stay in Washington, D.C., where I didn't fit in terribly well at that time. And I was pulled. So there was the fear piece, but then there was also a pull. There was an interest, there was a curiosity, and there was also a deep knowing. I had no clue how it would all play out, but I trusted, some part of me trusted that this was the right decision.
That is really incredible to hear that. And I think for the viewers to hear that trauma isn't a life sentence. It doesn't define you. No. And that you still had some capacity. And you say desperation, but I call it wisdom maybe caused by desperation, you know,
Absolutely
forced
valid.
wisdom, but that you listened to it.
I did. I did. Yeah. And
Uh,
I kept listening to it as well, because it wasn't just 1 month that I stayed there.
you make me cry. I just have to stop. Okay. I'm going to regroup, but thank you for sharing that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that you're touched by that,
Very touched. Yeah.
because that's the thing. If we are still willing to take a chance, if we're willing to pay attention to whether it's a voice of desperation or trust or eagerness, I likewise believe in that voice. I mean, it led me to the life I have now. And I'm so grateful that I had the chutzpah at 25 to do what I did, right? It led me to my own healing. It led me to my career. It led me to my husband, who I met at Esalen, and, you know, clearly our baby that we have, our toddler. So it was one of the most formative choices of my life, all because I listened.
And it certainly sounds like it, that you were able to tap into that. And so you said you stayed there, you were going to go for a month or two, but then you stayed for how long?
Almost 4 years.
Okay, so when you're committed, you're committed.
Well, yes. And it was a remarkable, again, series of events. Like, you can stay for 1 month as a work scholar, and then I stayed for a second. But after then, I had no idea what would happen. But they offered me something called an ES, which is an extended studentship. So I worked in the Esalen bakery, baking bread, taking spirituality and psychology and processing classes at night and on the weekends. And then when the administration got wind of my business background, they hired me to be the executive assistant and really help run the administration. So I did that for a while, and I started grad school down there as well. So I was commuting up to San Francisco, taking classes, you know, to be a therapist on the weekend, and then working.
Where did you go to grad school?
CIIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies.
School, very, very alternative, open.
Very, yes, wonderful training to be a therapist.
Yeah, and you were baking bread.
Yeah, I was baking bread for a portion of time. Yeah. And then, of course, running the admin.
I love bread. So I'm just like,
I do too. I do too.
So for those who haven't seen Esalen, I really offer you to Google it, because it is this magical place in the most beautiful place in the world, like on this cliff at the edge of the water, surrounded by nature. And it's really, it has to be a healing vortex of some sort.
Oh, completely. You know, so I was living in a little wooden yurt under a grove of eucalyptus trees. I was part of a community. I was, yes, baking bread. And really, Nadine, you and I know this as therapists, that experience of safety and containment allows one to kind of fall apart, as it were, and to start to access all the emotions and the thoughts and the memories. And that's completely what happened to me there. Esalen provided a container, a safe enough container, so that I could really fall apart and start doing this work at a very real level that I'd never been able to before.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. That's huge. And you'll appreciate this, Annie. My mother always told me, once you think you're losing your mind, you're actually regaining it.
I love that. I love it so much, right? Because we pathologize these dark nights of the soul so much. And it's like, no. This is good. This is where the work is really going to happen. So I completely concur.
You were 25 when you went in and 29 when you left?
Yeah. Was I 29? Yeah.
Around that. I'm just thinking.
Almost 29, yeah.
Okay. And then you had finished school by then?
I did. And so that's why I left Esalen, was to move up to the Bay Area to do my practicum, right? To collect the hours towards licensure, which I couldn't do at Esalen and in Big Sur at the time. So that's the reason why I left.
And then you met your husband there.
We did. Yes. We overlapped. He likewise stayed for a couple years, and we fell in love. And ultimately, he followed me up to the Bay Area, and we have built our life together up here for almost 10 years. We've been together for almost a decade.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And I think that's really important, because it's a message of hope for people that have endured abuse and maltreatment.
Oh.
And emotional neglect and not getting their needs met, and feel incredible shame because of that.
Well, and I think, you know, if I could just speak about my husband for a minute, I won't disclose his name or too many details, because he likes his privacy. But there are times when I wonder, given the really poor example I had of love from a male figure and love from a father, how I ended up with a man who is as deeply, bone deeply kind and good and decent as my husband. So that to me is a hope piece as well. Just because you have a really destructive or, challenging parent doesn't mean you can't still end up in a really healthy, loving relationship. Now, it does mean you might have to do some work along the way to acclimate yourself to what healthy relationship looks and feels like, how to not sabotage it, how to stay in one, right? How to keep one. But just because you have an early childhood trauma history doesn't mean it's your destiny. It doesn't mean it predisposes you for a lifetime of poor relationships or poor feelings inside yourself.
I
No.
agree. I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I wonder, because your dad was so overt in his psychopathology,
Mhm.
it was very clear for you to see the difference.
Yes. Yeah, I like to make a joke. Sociopaths and anyone who falls into the antisocial realm of things, they don't come within a mile of me these days. I mean, my radar is so finely attuned that they're just not even in my universe. They're not even in my sphere. So I have a very acute radar for that.
Yeah.
And they don't come into my life.
Yeah, I could imagine that. My experience was a little different in that my father left when, well, my mother kicked him out because she was a badass
Mhm.
and
I love it.
just the most
Yeah.
person in the world. She was reading Freud and Jung in the
Oh,
70s, and she kicked him out. And so, but it was a little different for me in that he was gorgeous, handsome, charming, and never even yelled at me.
mm,
Right? So
yeah. Complex.
that was complex. That's why it's complex trauma,
Totally.
you
Absolutely.
know? And so I didn't even know, because he was so psychopathic, that he was like this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and here I think what's really important to name too is that so often they pass, right? It's easy to present as like the handsome, dashing, glib, charming art dealer or CEO or small businessman, right? It's easy.
I own it.
Yeah, yeah, it's easy to pass as that for limited amounts of time,
Uh-huh.
right? For time limited periods. What's really illustrative is what goes on behind closed doors, right? And what happens when they are stressed, when they don't have to present, and when the mask comes off, who are they then,
Yeah.
right?
Or when you set boundaries.
Correct. Oh
And
boy,
I have
yes,
found that when you set boundaries with them is when the psychopathology really emerges.
totally. And that was part of what was always so uh, at play for me when I was a child, because I was always standing up for myself and saying no and pushing back. And that didn't go well. That didn't go well. But that's exactly right. If you push against, if you rebel against, if you hold boundaries with someone with that kind of pathology, you will see the pathology more than if you conflue, if you go with, if you make their life easy.
Right. I agree. I agree with that completely. So then you develop this lovely practice, and now you have a
You.
child, right? Or you have
Yeah.
a baby.
Yeah. So a couple of different things. I mean, I've been in practice since 2013, and I'm definitely niched as a relational trauma therapist. But in 2019, when my daughter was 3 months old, I launched a boutique therapy center in downtown Berkeley. And now I have a staff of 9 clinicians who work under me. And they're all trauma informed. They're all equipped to deal with relational trauma. And I effectively also created a boutique therapy center to serve people, because I couldn't serve as many clients as I wanted to who have histories somewhat like mine, or who were raised by personality or mood disordered parents. So I do that. I have online mental health courses about recovering from relational trauma. And I write, which is, of course, how we connected.
Yes, yes, yes. And your writing is very powerful and beautiful. And now that I've gotten to know you, I understand the depth of
Oh,
where it comes from.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, for anybody who does get to know me, I always say those articles, those essays are just very thinly veiled biographies. So
Yeah.
that's why I get messages all the time. How are you inside my mind? How do you understand? I'm like, kind of my story too.
Been
So
done that.
yeah.
And when you went to therapy, what was your experience like as a patient when you initially went? What do you
Yeah.
think were the most useful experiences that you had in therapy?
Yeah. So I've had a couple different rounds of therapy at
Course.
different times and places, but for that entry level experience, gosh, I mean, couple of different things. One, just even the pure experience of having somebody else listen to me and care about me and just give me their attention, it was like it was medicine. I hadn't had that. So that alone, and at that stage of therapy, it was really just about stabilization and letting me grieve and letting me, process just a tiny bit. We didn't get to the depths of it then. I wasn't equipped to, but that entry level experience of having somebody be kind and warm and listen to me, that was my gateway into that entire world. Which I've done greater depths of work across time, but it was a
That,
powerful
that
first
was the
experience.
stabilization
Exactly.
and the containment, right? A safe
Correct.
container, as you
A
said
safe
before.
container.
Okay, so that was the first, to
That
be
was the first
seen,
round.
to be heard, to feel felt, not
Mhm.
misunderstood was
Yeah,
medicine. Yeah.
absolutely. A place where I could go and cry nonstop for 50 minutes each week and
Mm,
have that be okay and
yeah.
not have that be further pathologized. That
Right.
was unbelievably healing at that first initial stage.
Mm, mm. Yeah,
Yeah,
especially, someone who's a valedictorian, right? To be
always
able
came
to
together,
just completely,
fall apart.
yeah, decompose. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah.
and then what else has worked for you?
Well, and
Sequentially.
yeah, and in subsequent rounds of therapy, the thing that became, because I did a large chunk of it, we didn't have licensed therapists at Esalen, but they were facilitators. We called them facilitators, and they operated much like the same, right? And in that experience, and then certainly later in my Bay Area years, I've worked with the same therapist for 10 years now. The primary thing that has been a support to my own healing through those rounds of therapy is the relationship. And this is what I think is so key, Nadine, when we're dealing with relational trauma or attachment trauma. We cannot heal in a vacuum no matter how many books we read. If the wound happens in the context of a relationship, it will ultimately have to be healed interpersonally through another safe, trusted, reparative relationship experience.
Mhm.
And so that's what I received in those two different chunks of therapy. And hopefully that's what I provide to other people as a therapist now myself. And I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, I always say the wounding happens in relationships, so the healing must happen in relationship as a vaccine.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I've been in. Oh God, I don't even know how long I've been in therapy.
Right.
It's like the minute after meeting Jordan, I was like, "Hello, this is way more than I can handle." And I went to a therapist for 7 years,
Yeah.
and I just think, like, I wish I could get those notes because she must have looked at me. Not that I ever felt that. She was so loving and accepting, and similar
Mm.
to what you said, a place of no judgment.
Yes. Yeah.
It was
How
so
rare is that?
beautiful. And I find that if ever I get frustrated, like, God, this person isn't getting it, or I always think back, you know what, Nadine? Your therapist out with you for 7 years. And you came in and told the same ridiculous stories time after time and offer that for people because people heal in their own way, in their own time.
Exactly, exactly. And I remember having that experience with my own therapist, my Bay Area years therapist. I would go in. This is when I was like trying to learn how to be in this healthy relationship with my then boyfriend, now husband. I would go in. It was literally all I talked about, week after week, year after year, just like working through it. And I remember asking her, I'm like, I'm so sorry. Are you bored of me yet? And she's like, no. No, it's easy for me because it's not my stuff. And you need to take as long as you need to take with this. And now when clients ask me, aren't you bored of me? I just keep talking about the same thing. I have that same experience. Like, no, this is easy. This is easy because it's not my stuff. And you're on your own timeline and you get to take as long as it takes.
Right. No, they'll always say, I can't believe I'm going back to this. I'm like, you can't believe you're going back to this? I've been in therapy for 25 years.
Yeah,
Now,
right.
granted, very different types of,
Sure.
therapy along
Exactly.
the way. And I'm a somatic, I got my doctorate in somatic psychotherapy, so I utilize the body
Yes.
a lot in,
Yes.
in therapy now. And it's transformed, of course, and to have that safe place, I think for me, what I was very blind to, and I don't know if this was true for you, was the shame that I felt,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
feeling not worthy of my father's love.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still working with shame, not in the same way that I did, 25 to 35. It looks different now, but I didn't even know that was at play. And all these, voices and thoughts that would rise up inside of me. I hate my life. I hate myself. I hate everyone. I hate everything. It's like, that was the voice of shame. I just didn't know it. I didn't know it. I didn't know what that voice was. So yeah, so I have a different relationship to shame now, but I love the work of Dr. Brene Brown. And she talks about how it's such a human experience. I mean, you're going to have a lot more of it if you have a relational trauma background. But even when that initial stage of healing is done, or multiple stages are done, you're still going to experience it. You,
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, if you're a person on the planet, you're going to experience shame. I mean,
I, I think what they say is only psychopaths and toddlers don't experience it.
it's a good thing we experience it. Okay, I'll
Yes.
take that. I'll
Yeah,
take that. Right. And so now you're a mom.
I am. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And with that understanding of relational trauma, I'm sure it affects how you parent greatly.
Absolutely, it does. Well, um, I mean, I try and think of a way that it doesn't inform how I parent. I mean, I fell in love with my husband mostly, not mostly. I mean, he's an amazing husband, but I also knew he would be the greatest gift I could give a daughter too. Someone that kind and loving and devoted and stable. So I think about that every day, about how my daughter is having a much different experience than I had, and how she won't have to spend the first 25 years of her life surviving and climbing out of trauma. I mean, she's going to have a pretty big head start.
Wow.
And it informs the daycares we send her to, the schools we send her to, because I'm looking for people who are going to support her emotional development and respect and dignity of the child as much as anything else. It informs how we speak to her, how we regulate our own emotions, and the kind of practices we have around, when she throws things or have tantrums. I mean, I'm acutely aware of the tremendous privilege and tremendous responsibility of being a parent. And
Mhm.
that's where being a therapist, for better or for worse, can make you hyper acute to these things. And we're not going to be perfect. My daughter's going to end up in therapy, I'm sure, but
Yeah.
hopefully the time she spends in therapy will be less than mine. That is my goal.
Yeah, and that also helps to destigmatize therapy, because the word
Totally.
stigma means disgrace, which there's
Yes.
nothing disgraceful about going to therapy. Both of my children are in therapy.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I always say we're either going to therapy, paying for therapy, giving therapy. there's, there's always something going on. And I did not have, I guess I gave birth at 25 to my daughter
Yes.
and 27 to my son when I was in therapy, but yet not a therapist.
Right.
So, I'm always like, oh yeah, I did that part a little wrong, but that's okay. They forgive me. And I
Oh,
think I offer that to parents to say, but as you suggested, we don't have to be perfect parents. And when I do, because I still make tons of mistakes, I
sure.
always offer a repair. I'm sorry.
So that's what I always talk about. Rupture in relationship is inevitable. It
Never.
is inevitable that we are going to mess up, we're going to screw up, we're going to say the wrong thing, we're going to miss a tune. I mean, it's just inevitable. What counts is the repair. Do we then acknowledge what we did? Do we try and say, I'm sorry, I love you, how can I make this better? That, it's not the ruptures that actually lead to a challenged relationship, it's the absence of attempts at repair right? So I think that's beautiful, and that's a very healthy and destigmatized orientation to have.
Yeah, I just think it's really important to offer that to people, especially mothers. I find they're so, if I don't do this, if I don't do that, and I'm like, you
Yeah.
be good enough 30% of the time. It's okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's boy, that's a whole nother interview, isn't it? Talking
Yes,
about the mom
yes,
guilt and
yes, yes,
who's
mom
giving you
guilt
the
for
perfect care.
sure, for sure. And so, are your parents currently in your life, or
Not my biological father. My mother definitely is, and so is
okay,
my stepfather, but
yeah,
absolutely not my biological father. And that's, that actually correlates to the healing and, strong mental health that I now have is the ability to keep that individual out of my life and certainly out of my daughter's life.
yes, yes. I made. It's ironic we hadn't discussed this, but I made that same choice. Yeah,
Yeah.
my biological father.
Yeah.
I made a choice to not have him. I like whatever I so even though I didn't go to court, I said you are no longer involved in my life at 39. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And I think so. This is another thing I write about very openly and honestly, and quite a bit on the blog is about estrangement because it's such an underground sort of shadow subject.
Yes.
And the reality is, there are many people who are estranged from their family members either by choice or by force, force function. And people have estranged themselves from them. It's a very common experience, but we are not talking about it enough, and we don't talk about it enough, I think, as an option to take care of yourself. We live in a world that is so pro family, really, since the dawn of Judeo Christianity. They're your family. You have to forgive them. You have to be in touch with them. He's your father. You have to have a relation. No, you don't actually.
Mhm.
Right. So we have these religious institutions, we have communities basically saying no matter what they do, they're your family. You have to be in touch with them. And I think that's a form of abuse. I do not believe that at all. I think it's completely your choice to remove somebody from your life if they are detrimental to your well-being. And I talk very openly and honestly about that in my articles,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
that is something that some of us may have to do in order to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And when I did it, I mean, I'm 50. I'm going to be 53, so I did it 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and it was because my father would not admit he was a gambling addict.
Oh, interesting.
And I was like, no, you are a gambling addict. And
Right.
I went to a codependency clinic after I left my ex husband.
Mhm.
It's called Breakthrough now at the Karen Foundation. And
Oh,
where I learned how to set boundaries, self care is not selfish,
oh,
and
yeah.
to be okay with setting pretty intense boundaries with a family member such as that.
Hmm.
And
I'm so glad you had that experience.
oh, it changed my life. Yeah, it was, thank God. I mean, I had, like,
I know.
whoever, thank goddesses, thank somebody that I ended up there. I guess I listened to that little voice.
Totally. Absolutely. And, it makes me just so grateful for however we hear that it's okay to set boundaries or it's okay to take care of ourselves or practice self care in some way. However, we come across that, whether it's an article or a center or Esalen or our first therapist, thank goodness for all those different people who are giving us those messages, right? Because even though you and I now, that's old and we know that, and it almost feels like second nature, I never forget that for some people, that might be the first time they're hearing it and how transformative it can be when that verbal permission slip is given. No, you don't have to forgive them. No, you get to hold that boundary. You get to say, if you don't tell me the truth, I can't have a relationship with you. That's very powerful.
Yeah, and it speaks to resilience
Yes.
because you have a sense of agency when you do
Yes.
that.
Absolutely. And personal empowerment,
Yeah.
right? And so that's so often, I think that's one of the hallmarks of coming from relational trauma background is feeling like you don't have a choice,
Mm.
feeling like you are not empowered, right? That you don't get to say this or you don't get to do this. And I think that the psychological esteeming process, it doesn't happen just in a vacuum. It happens when we make hard choices and we start to set boundaries and take care of ourselves and assert it, even though people around us don't like it. I think esteem is earned by those moments of setting boundaries and taking care of ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah, because it's a way to actually show yourself the love that you didn't get. Right?
Exactly.
Because you're doing for yourself what wasn't done for you,
Exactly.
instead of doing what was done to you, right? Like tolerating the abuse, saying yes to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I always like to encourage my patients or anyone who participates in my online course to imagine taking care of themselves in the way that a good enough parent would have ideally taken care of you, right? If you were the parent to 5-year-old you, 8-year-old you, what would you do now? Right.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up your course because I wanted to integrate that. Can you explain to the viewers what your course entails and how you offer it? Because it looks great.
sure. Well, I wanted to create an opportunity for folks to work with me beyond the borders of California. I have a very wide global readership, which is such an honor. And many of those folks live in countries where there is either sort of a poverty of therapists, there just aren't enough, or there are no therapists, quite honestly. So I created a course called Hard Families, Good Boundaries, which
Oh,
is, as the title suggests, all about how to know what your boundaries are, and then how to skillfully and assertively hold them with the challenging people in your life. The subtitle of the course is How to Feel Good No Matter Who Is in Your Life. And while it sounds like it's just about boundaries, it really is a bit of a Trojan horse course. It teaches about healthy versus unhealthy relationships and how to recognize them and really feel the difference in your body. Certainly, it teaches you what boundaries are, and how to know where yours are, and importantly, how to know when they're being crossed. It
mhm.
teaches you about how to communicate responsibly and assertively versus these other styles that many of us are used to, passively or aggressively. It also teaches you how emotional regulation skills, how to
Mm,
take care of yourself when they have big reactions or when you have big reactions, shame, guilt, fear. And
mhm.
finally, we have modules all about estrangement, when that may be the choice that you need to make, and also a module about how to know when and if your boundaries can or should be renegotiated, or what to do if they're forced to be compromised,
Okay.
such as the death of a parent and being co-executor with a sibling you're estranged from. So it really is, I tried to fill a little gap in the market in terms of creating something that folks with really challenging family systems could come to and say, oh, this is the help I need. This is the help to set those boundaries.
Yeah, it sounds absolutely fantastic. I wish I had that. Okay, but we can offer it to other people. You can offer it to other people. And how long is it for? Or does the person get to decide? Or
Yes, so access to the materials, the video course is lifetime. You have it forever because it's not like these issues are one time and done, right? We come back to the content again and again. Usually people come back to it during the holiday season just to get a refresher. The pieces that are a little bit more time limited, when you join the course, we do have a private Facebook group. It's a community of black sheep, as I like to call it, completely private, people supporting each other, working through these hard moments. And there's also 6 months of coaching calls with me. So the 6 month of the Facebook group and the coaching calls is, again, 6 months, but the course materials are lifetime.
oh, Annie, this is so beautiful. I love it. And I love how you say the Trojan horse of the boundaries, right?
Yeah. Well, because this is the thing that nobody talks about. It's like, it's not just enough to say no to a boundary. You have to understand like that certain kinds of behavior isn't even okay to begin with. And that requires a lot of psychoeducation in other realms, doesn't it?
Yes, it really does. It really does. Because I'll say, well, why don't we work on setting some boundaries? But I don't even know what that looks like. I don't even know what that means. I don't understand how to discern what my boundaries are.
Right.
So this sounds like a great, great way to do that. And you're so right. It's so perfect for around the holidays and what everybody's dealing with.
Oh my gosh, this year especially.
Yeah, and this year, I think one of the silver linings and the gifts of this year is it is the 2020 year of seeing clearly, because it's definitely had to bring up people's relational trauma because it's chronic, it's cumulative, it's never ending. We feel helpless, we feel vulnerable.
Yeah, and then you add into it the strain of a global pandemic where family members are making different choices about safety and health, and then you add into it election triggers within a family system. I mean, I think you, like we were talking before recording hit, we've never seen anything quite like this in terms of maybe the strain that our patients are under. And I've, certainly never seen quite so many calls coming into my therapy center. I think that's very reflective of the level of suffering and challenge that people are feeling right now for many different reasons.
Yes, yes. And that's especially why, because honestly, I am an introvert, and it seems like I'm good at this and I can be, but it's not my favorite thing to do. I'm a more behind the scenes. That's why I am a therapist. However, after getting to know you and your work and feeling my therapy room be a microcosm for the macrocosm, what's happening,
Yeah.
I called you up and I said, people need this right now. They need to know that they can get through this, they can heal. We're both examples of that in our own different ways. And your course offering is so exciting because we need resources, we do need tools, and we do need psychoeducation. And we can't talk to everybody.
No, no, we can't. I mean, I created a center because I couldn't work with everyone and I wanted people to work with really trusted trauma-informed folks. And then I created a course and I write these articles too, because I think one of the most powerful and healing things that can happen for someone who comes from a relational trauma background is to feel less alone, to feel more seen and more supported. And that's why I'm so grateful that you are open about your own personal background, right? And I'm so thrilled we're having this conversation, and I hope people can hear it, and maybe their experience looks different, but at least they see in us models and examples of hope. You can go through really hard things and still have a beautiful life on the other side if you're willing to put in the work, right? If you're willing to do that psychotherapeutic processing, healing, recovery work.
No, I think that's a very wise thing to say because, first of all, I didn't ask for a movie to be made about my life that was a Greek tragedy to begin with and extraordinarily painful. And before the movie came out, I was just like, oh my God, really? But I surrendered, and actually, ironically, people thought, well, okay, if you can go through this and come out the other side, just as you suggested, then you can help me.
Oh, I mean, it's amazing. I didn't even think to Google you or to know what kind of became of you. And the fact that you embody the wounded healer archetype and you went on to train as a therapist and you're now a doctor. I mean, it's extraordinary to me. You are an archetype of the wounded healer, I think, Nadine. And I'm sure that your story must give hope to so many people. Because here's the other thing I think about your story and I think about that movie. So often first of all, most people only think of trauma as like a thing that happens to veterans in wars, right? And they dismiss that trauma can be something that happens in the context of growing up. Moreover, then the second myth I see people have is, well, maybe that only happens in really low income families or that happens in like poverty circumstances. And it's like, oh no, this can happen in the 1% and the 5% and the 10%. This can happen in upper middle class lives. Without a doubt. And it's very important to illustrate that, I think, so that people can see themselves more clearly so that they can get the right kind of help.
Yes, it really is. And nobody has perfect parents. And so maybe their parents are not as extreme or less.
Or more.
However, I always say there's two people in the world, those that are in therapy and those that should be. That's because I'm a therapist. I'm biased.
No, but I love it. But it's show me a person that couldn't benefit from therapy. I don't know one. Do you?
No.
No.
I don't even, I'm ready to give my dog therapy. I don't know if there's any sentient being.
Totally, right? And that's, again, that's why I'm like, if my daughter needs or wants to go to therapy, great, go. A space for you to grow and heal and process and have a dedicated other that you can really get to know your inner life with. Beautiful. Who wouldn't benefit from that?
Yeah, and therapy too is expensive, and so, however, you can go on your insurance panel you
Sure.
can see therapists in your insurance, that take your insurance, and
Really?
contact them. And I always offer this, that, Annie and I had to do 3,000 hours. So
Yeah.
6,000 hours between the two of us. And I think I did a
Yeah.
thousand extra because
Yeah.
California's so screwed up. But so, I mean, for $5 or $10 or $20. So there are interns in
Mm.
your area to reach out to, because as
Mhm.
Annie suggested,
Mhm.
initially a safe container and the stabilization without judgment is
Right.
healing. You
Absolutely.
don't have to go to Freud.
No, you don't have to go to Freud. And I think this is such an important point because, of course, very highly seasoned expert therapists who don't take insurance can cost quite a bit. And of course, you can get reimbursement through out-of-network mental health benefits if your insurance plan offers that. So that's one way to work with maybe therapists at our level.
Yes.
But yes, then again, there are therapists who maybe charge less, like my staff at my center, or interns who are getting their hours. Or then there's these other things, right? These beautiful videos that you're offering to the public for free. The articles I write on my blog, right? There's lots of forms of getting support out there that don't have to cost quite so much.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I really think that people think that there's a financial barrier to therapy, but just like you're speaking about, there are so many different ways to enter into that healing relationship.
Yes, there really are. And so just, search them out. Follow that inner voice, that
Yeah.
little voice that we talked
Yeah.
about. And I just would love to end with this, that in this season of giving, Annie, thank you for being a gift to me and to our viewers, and for sharing your wisdom and your expertise and your story, and just continuing to help heal the world.
Thank you, Nadine. That means the world to me. I think that the work of my life has now become my life's work, and so as long as there's breath in my body, I will be out here doing this. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share more of my story with your audience.
Oh, I just got goosebumps, and you know what? It's just so powerful to sit with you and see your passion and share your passion, because people say, like, don't you want, you listen to depressed people all day? I'm like, I love it.
Right. Me too. I love it. I love this work with every cell in my body. I love being a therapist. I love it.
Well, I know it wasn't a smooth road that got you here.
No.
Thank you once again for being you, and I look forward to more conversations with you.
Thank you, Nadine. It's such an honor to speak with you.